Hello again. So welcome to my fourth video in the series of 6 for the Free as a Bird class in a box. Thank you if you've got as far as this. Thank you for sticking with me. So I'd like you to see this card here. This is card number 4. And this features this lovely brick embossing folder. Now, if you haven't got a die cutting or embossing machine, I have included this in your pack. So this has already been embossed for you. And if you can see the detail of that, really lovely brickwork. And it's got bricks at different heights. Okay, so really nice. So for this particular card, you will need a crumb cake card base. Now you have 2 of these in your pack. There's nothing to stop you using any of your other colours as well, if you wish. So if you wanted to swap that out and have a different colour, you're most welcome. Let's see, I might do one on the blue for a change. Okay, you will then need an early espresso layer, and again you have 2 of these in your packs, because this card and card number 5 are similar but they use different components. So this layer is going to go on to there, and then we have different options here for the main image. So there are 2 things that you can do. One is you can stamp. If you have the stamp set, you could stamp the main image and colour it in, and I'm going to do that and give you some tips on colouring in. The alternative, if you don't have the stamp set, or you don't have maybe a sentiment that you would wish to put on there, is take this as a template, a bit like I suggested earlier, and place it on a section of your paper that you would like to use. Now I particularly want to use blue because I've got this blue background now. So I'm actually going to pick up this section here. So what I would do is I'd place that on there. Make sure it's in rough alignment. You don't want it too wonky, otherwise your birds are going to be wonky on their branch. Okay, bear in mind what else there is on there. So, you know, if you prefer this more, then don't waste that little section on there. Cut a little bit higher, for example. So, you know, just use, just be sensible, really. So I just want those little bits of birds there. So what I can do is literally draw around this. So this is, as I suggested very early on, just literally draw around it and then cut it either with your trimmer or a craft knife. This is where I did the circle earlier on. So this is quite an easy shape to cut out. If you have other dies, then obviously you can do your own shapes with that. If you've got some of the rectangle stitch dies, they work particularly well, for example. Or you can just cut it with your trimmer. So I'll show you both because I want to show you some colouring in and just give you a little bit of hints and tips of that. So what you can do is literally position this on the cut line. I can see through. I appreciate you can't really see through there. So that's the top cut line, and if you're doing it this way, you don't have to be, you can make it slightly narrower, you can make it slightly longer. You're not guided by the dies in the same way. Okay, so this is where I've got the triangular bit, so I can just literally cut there and there. Like so. Okay, so you don't have to make it even, you can leave it like that if you wanted to. You could round the edges, okay, or I can find my template here and pop it on there, and then just use that. Oh, I made it a little bit shorter, didn't I? Look. So what I can do is just bring that in very slightly. I know I'm going to cut off a little bit of the bird. I hope you can see that. Just trim that edge. One there and one there. So you can make this longer or shorter this way. Okay, and that's because you've got the die cut to use. Alright, so entirely your choice. Use the papers, or if you have the stamp set or similar stamp set, use those. So these are in, you know, you can use one or the other. Let me just show you a few hints and tips for colouring in. Let me find my Early Espresso. So I'm using the Early Espresso ink again. You can hear the birds chirping outside, which is very appropriate. Okay, I'm just going to position this on here. I hope you can see that okay. And if you wanted to, you could have space on there for your sentiment. I'm just going to have that slightly high actually, and maybe sneak a sentiment in the bottom. So just stamping that well, like so. Push my stamp down, and I think that little thank you will fit in there nicely, so that's what I'm going to add. There we go. A little bit wonky, isn't it? It will do. Okay, so when it comes to colouring in, Stampin' Up have done all the work for you, because unless you want a different design of bird, if you want a robin or something, then that you can just you know, look those up. But so you can see here we've got yellow and brown, we've got grey and brown, and here we've got some blues and greens. Okay, so use that as a good guide for your colouring in. I'm using blends pens, but you could use watercolours if you wanted to. And I've got a selection of colours here. So I'm going to do, appreciate you can't really see that very well. I hope you can see that. So I'm going to pick up some of those colours there with the, I think they use, I've got like a crumb cake. So I've got a bit of yellow, a bit of green, a bit of blue. Really wanted a crumb cake, but I can't see that. I've got dark grey granite here. So I'm just going to use some blue for the breasts of those with a little bit of green in. So it's quite a small area, so it won't take you too long to do your colouring in. You can do it nice and light. Okay, to start with, I'm going to add, so I'm going to do it all over in the blue. Add a little bit of green underneath, sort of here and there, like so. While I'm there, I'm actually going to do the green of the leaves. So you can either take your time, but this is quite a nice sketch design, so you can get away with just being slightly sketchy rather than defined. And they've got Calypso coral leaves, but I'm going to flowers rather. I'm going to do some mango melody, just because this happens to be to hand. You could use watercolour pencils. You could also use Stampin' Right markers if you were careful, because it's quite a small area. You could use them with blends pens, for example. Just going to add a little bit of light yellow in there and then sort of blend it all in together. And then there's a little bit of brown sort of across the back, isn't there? So use the colouring that they give you, unless you know exactly what type of bird it is that you want to do. I missed a leaf there, I've just seen that. So let's add the leaf in. There we go. And then just going to dark for the beaks and a little bit of dark on their heads. There we go. And I'm just doing this, this is grey granite. I would normally do this in a brown, but just to save time, as I've got this here, just going to do that in grey. There we go. So I've got my pool party. I'm just going to go back over that and just do a little bit of blending in and adding a little bit more of that blue. There we go. So the one I did on the sample here, I did as mainly yellow with a little bit of depth like that. And then this is the one I've just done now. So your alternative is to literally just use a panel that you've cut out. Use that as a template, okay, if you wish. So in order to put this layer together, so this is that's picked up the blue look for the card. There's a couple of things you can do. The first thing you can do is add some more texture to this embossing folder. So this embossing folder is called Brick and Mortar. Okay, you do need a die cutting or embossing machine to use it, but it's really, the detail is really amazing for the different sort of texture of the stones. So what you can do is take a sponge and some ink and go over that to make it pick up some of that, more of that detail. Let me grab a sponge and show you if I can find them. So I had one to hand. Now I can't see one. How typical is that? Okay, let's see if I've got a doorbell that would do. Let's see what colour this is. Oh, it's purple. That's no good, is it? Don't really want purple bricks. Unless you're moving house. Sorry. I have it. Sorry to keep you waiting. I'm working on the basis if you've got this far, you'll be patient with me. Thank you. It's got a little bit of blue on it. Now there's nothing to stop you doing some stamping on there as well if you wanted to. bear in mind that as it's already embossed, it can be a little more tricky to cover. So I'm going to pick up some of this espresso, but you could use a lighter brown if you preferred. And then I'm literally, and if I just do half of it, you'll see, hopefully see the difference. Putting the ink on, just wiping a little bit away, and then just rubbing it over. And the higher the different depths, the more detailed that becomes. So I'm just doing it more on one side than the other. So I hope you can see this is the unsponged side. This is the sponge side. Okay. Now what this is quite effective to do, if you do have this embossing folder, is to do it on white card and then add a pink or a blue or green or something, and then it makes it look like a painted house wall. Okay, you don't need to do the whole thing because it's going to have that section in the middle, but if you want to really make that stand out, can you see the difference? So that's just using a sponge. You could use a dauber if you have a sponge dauber, or a brayer if you had a brayer, that would also work. So those are my birds that are going to go onto there. You could, as I say, use your panel. And what I'm going to do is wrap the ribbon round. If you can see on here, I wrapped the ribbon round that layer and done a little bow on the right hand side. So I'm going to do that with this layer as it is. I can find my ribbon just here. So you could probably put ribbon on every single project I've got here, I think, and you'd still have plenty. So if you don't want to use waste any ribbon, you could cut the bit at the back and just attach it separately in two pieces. Let's just get that flat. No point having it at an angle, like so. Tie a knot like that, and then I'm going to tie a bow from there. You could tie a bow separately and add it. What I quite like about doing it this way is that you can move the whole thing left or right. I can fluff that up a little bit. And just to show you how to change the colour of this ribbon, if I just hop to the other end of the ribbon, where I've got my pool party, for example, you can take your blends pen and just run over that ribbon. If you can see that. So that you end up with, I'll turn that over, a sort of lighter blue dotty ribbon. You could do the same with the yellow if you wanted to. So let's come back to my card here. I'm going to snip that edge of the ribbon off. I will tidy that up in a minute because it's a little bit too big for my liking. So let me make that smaller. You do have to persuade this ribbon a little bit because some of the dots, because they're raised, can get in the way a little bit. Okay, like so. Trim that little bit off. One there and one there, like that. Okay, now if you've got different layers of card, you could put another layer behind. It's quite big actually on there. There's not much space to play with. If you've got these sets of nested dies though, you could obviously have different layers, smaller and larger. So that is going to go on to our early espresso layer, and that in turn is going to go onto our pool party layer. So I'm just going to use wet glue for that. You could use snail. I would say you need to have a really good firm bond when you're using embossing folders, because obviously this is now ridged, and if you don't press it down really well and make good contact, it can peel away, because obviously it's not all necessarily stuck down. So just take your time. This is where I find wet glue is good, because it sort of counteracts the highs and lows, and it can sort of squish into the bits where it needs to, whereas with snail it just stays exactly where you put it. Okay, let's pop that onto there. I'm just going to move my mat out of the way so I don't get any ink on the back of the card. Nothing to stop you having it this way with your sentiment on the right hand side. You could leave the ribbon out altogether if you don't like the ribbon. Entirely up to you. And there we go. That's going to go onto there. Like so. And then you've got your choice of your stamped panel. Those birds really are sweet. Or your cut panel. And if you wanted to make this smaller or punch it with a different shape, that is absolutely fine. So if you found, let's see, a nice squared off shape. I know the one I'm looking for. That's this one here. Then if you prefer and you have a punch, you could obviously punch that shape out, whichever way round you wanted. Obviously I've cut this already, but if you wanted a smaller area, that could be circular, then you could pop that onto there if you preferred. Okay. Or you could just cut a rectangle if you wanted. I'm going to use that as I've stamped it. So do make sure you put the ribbon on that element before you put it onto the card, and then you'll have a nice crisp card inside. And I'm going to pop this on with dimensionals, which have just disappeared. How does that even happen? Because I tidied them away. Maybe not. After my last card, I'm just going to use the edges of these, like so. 1, 2. So don't waste the edges. I know they don't look particularly pretty, but nobody's going to see underneath there. Just pop those in like that, peel off the backing, and away we go. So if you haven't ordered the Free as a Bird stamp set and you would like to, they are still available. They are carrying forward in the catalogue. So just going to use those bricks to line that up, like so. And there we have our 4th card in the series. That was my original one. Oops. I have added a little bit of sponging here, in this case in Balmy Blue. So if you wanted to do that, instead of having the white, then you could do that. Okay, thank you so very much.